There has never been a more important time to move in a vegan direction. Whether you're ready to start, restart, or re-energize your vegan or plant-based practice, this podcast is for you. I'm Michele Olander, life coach, vegan, ADHD matriarch, travel lover, and smoothie loather. And I know that it's the details that get in the way of your vegan journey. But I like to believe that the obstacle is always the way. So every week we meet here where I translate the tools of life coaching and Stoic philosophy. I bring you actionable tips, some laughs, interesting guests, and vegan ideas for everyone at any age. All to help you veg your best. Episode 266. Moderation. Decision or excuse? Hey, my Vedge Your bestie, it's Michele. Happy October. How was your September? How was your September? Because mine, to be honest, was a bit of a blur. I know the weather was gorgeous here on the Rhode Island coast, and my phone says I got darn close to 10,000 steps in as an average every day. But other than that, I'm not sure I could actually give you a play-by-play of how this last month went. You know, September was definitely one of those months that I had to frequently take my own advice and stay in my lane, not get ahead of myself, not try to figure everything out, just to do the next thing on the list. One thing at a time, one step at a time. And when I say the next essential thing on the list, I really don't mean do everything on your list, because even on the best days, I can't, you can't, no one can get everything done. But I can intentionally, strategically try to aim at doing what's most important to me, you know? And for me, what's most important for me, well, that means this podcast gets made. You know, I aim for 10,000 steps outdoors whenever possible. I eat plant-based. I try to read or listen to something that feeds my curiosity about the world, whether it's about language or art history or travel. And if I don't hit those things, I really don't feel great. And of course, like you, I'm also juggling housework and community and family obligations and appointments and errands. It all takes bandwidth. So I do rely on a kind of personal hit list, essential list of the priorities that keep me grounded and help me to remember what it is I really want to do moving forward. When I get in a spin cycle, how do I feel like me? Which brings us to today's episode, because a lot of people might look at my list and say, well, that sounds like good moderation, Michele. But I have a problem with the word moderation, and I'm not sure moderation is a value. I think it can be important if moderation is a strategy. If moderation is serving us. So today we're going to talk a little bit. I think it'll be a short episode because you've got some longer interviews coming up. Those take some time, so we'll try to make this short. But we're going to talk about the difference between intentional moderation and what I call spitballing moderation. When you kind of, you don't really have hard and fast parameters for knowing what does moderation even mean. We'll get into a little bit of behavioral science, some vegan coaching, and some real life examples that you probably will be able to relate to. So let's go. What is moderation? You know, the subject came up in last week's episode with Terry Chrisman, and, it sounds great, doesn't it? Moderation sounds like very good, sage advice. Everything in moderation. But I think we have to be super careful that moderation isn't some sort of retroactive excuse or spin on what actually just happened. I hear people say it to me all the time. I mean, literally all the time. They say, well, I like to think that it's I'm vegan in moderation, or I make these choices in moderation, or I eat healthy in moderation. And that's fine. That's fine, of course, if moderation is actually a strategy that you've created ahead of time that helps you make your choices. But I think all too often, for most of us, it's just this positive spin we use to describe what ended up happening when choices were made with no strategy at all. Now, you may know we've talked about his work here before because I think he's so fascinating. The brilliant behavioral economist Dan Ariely. He's shown that people are generally very poor at self-reporting and also very poor at self-regulating vague concepts. When the rules are fuzzy, like just have a little or don't go overboard, okay, we all tend to cheat ourselves, and that's called moral licensing. So, for example, you ate a salad at lunch, and now, of course, you can justify a huge dessert. That's not moderation. That's kind of an unconscious bargaining. It might be true. It might be right, but you're not making the decision based on forward thinking. You're kind of just looking back and go, yeah, well, I just had a salad for lunch. And in coaching, I often call this the moderation mirage because it feels like you're being responsible, but really you're just avoiding making a decision because you have not defined what moderation means ahead of time. And I'm not saying I know what your moderation should look like. You get to decide, but I'd like to suggest that most of us need to be a little more specific about what moderation means. So you can have like a default moderation where people say to me, yeah, well, I usually eat mostly plant-based most of the time. I think you probably know many, many, many people who say something very similar. I usually eat mostly plant-based most of the time. And I would like to encourage you, if it's a topic, if it's an area, whether it's plant-based, any area that you're saying you're being using moderation, I would like to encourage you to be a little more decision-based. And what would decision-based moderation sound like? It might sound like I eat vegan when I'm at home, and when I travel, I choose vegan anywhere I can. Or I eat vegan when I'm traveling in restaurants, but at home with my family, I eat vegan 3 out of 7 dinners a week. You see the difference? One is a choice with actual boundaries. And the other, the first one, the default moderation, I usually eat plant-based most of the time, that's kind of a description about what happened from the rearview mirror, with no actual data. So default moderation just has a tendency to fail. And that's whether it's your fitness goals, your creative goals, your financial goals, or your plant-based or vegan goals. Because ambiguous goals yield inconsistent behavior. And people who've studied goal-setting theory, they show that specific goals are so important, right? To eat 30 grams of plant-based protein at lunch, far more effective than saying, yeah, well, I eat healthy. I make sure I try to eat healthy most of the time. Okay, and I bet you agree that we can file that under duh, but we all do it. We all have a tendency to be very wavy gravy about things that we just haven't made a decision about yet. So when we say we want to be moderate, we want to use moderation in all things. Okay, I get it. It does sound positive, but then we don't define what moderate actually means. And we fall into what psychologists call the intention-action gap. I think we've talked about that here on the pod, and that's Britt Frank did a lot of very insightful work into that idea. Procrastination, inconsistency, and confusion, they're not flaws. They're just symptoms of a poorly designed system. If you're experiencing procrastination and inconsistency and confusion, it's not a character flaw, okay? It's an indication that there's some system designing you might be able to do that would be much more helpful for you. So if you're trying to go more plant-based and, you've decided moderation is your plan, chances are you will keep sliding back into old patterns and you will experience decision fatigue and you'll decide to do something different tomorrow and you'll feel that kind of low-grade guilt that, you just don't know how to do it right and it's too hard and maybe you're not set up for it right now and you don't have the support and you're too old and you live in the wrong place. And, default moderation is it's kind of denial, but with a little halo over its head. But if we want to practice moderation, as I'm encouraging us to look at it, moderation as a decision ahead of time, what does that look like? What does it look like when moderation is actually a useful strategy? I think it's when it's rooted in some sort of value that you have, that it's defined, and that you have some sort of data that you can track. Moderation with more intention than with improvisation. And I know there's a lot of things about our society that really encourage us to be spontaneous and to improvise. And those are good things. They're not bad things. And they're even better with things that aren't a problem for us right now. So if there's something that you're having a problem with, maybe moderation as a default isn't the strategy for you. Maybe you want to be much more intentional, and you can do it, and it doesn't have to be super strict. It just has to be a decision, and you could define it maybe in writing. You could maybe just say it out loud in a way that you fully understand. I eat vegan 90% of the time or 80% of the time with one non-vegan meal per week. I choose that meal to be more socially flexible. Okay? That's a decision. Or you can decide the exceptions ahead of time. But I recommend you don't make them in the heat of the moment. In general, I think you should decide what those exceptions are in advance. Does that mean when you are at a work dinner? Does it mean when you are traveling another country and your language skills aren't up to the scrutiny? Maybe it's breakfasts or brunches when you have them with your aunt, or wedding cake, whatever it is. Pre-decide your exceptions. And I'm not going to argue with you about your exceptions. You are allowed to. Maybe it's about your medications. I will tell you right now, I do not overthink any medication that is prescribed to me currently, because nothing is long-term. Any medication I'm getting right now, I just take as the doctor prescribes. That is a pre-decided exception in my case. And maybe set a review date. So if I find out that I'm going to have to do some sort of a long-term medication or treatment going forward, I might now think, okay, I wonder what options exist for me that are more ethical, or which ones I can avoid that are less ethical. So pre-decide and set a review date to look at that. So we can check in with yourself maybe in 2 weeks or in 30 days. How did the strategy of being intentional work for you? Maybe you were expecting certain things were going to be hard or impossible or difficult, and they really weren't. And so now you might change the parameters of your choices. And even if you're not a tracker, I'm not a tracker. It's not my it's not my gift. But this summer I did track my protein grams because I thought I was getting plenty of protein, but I decided I needed to know a little bit more of whether that was true and what days I was getting it and what days I wasn't getting. What I wanted to be getting close to was 70 grams or more of protein per day. Now, obviously, you choose your own metric, but I didn't know what meals, formulations, ingredients, quantities. I didn't know specifically what added up to 70 grams or so of protein per day. And it made a difference when I started to track it, because small awareness leads to much bigger momentum than just saying, yeah, well, I'll just choose more protein, which had been my default previously. So this is where you get to become the designer of your moderation, not just a vague, optimistic reporter that, you usually eat plant-based. That's right. So if we get real for a minute, in the context of ethical veganism, moderation is, well, it's difficult, isn't it? Moderation kind of sounds like a socially acceptable way of saying, I want to believe I'm doing this ethical thing without the inconvenience of the ethical thing. And I get that. I really do. But when people say I'm mostly vegan, I always wonder, is that by your choice? Is that some sort of specific intention that you are using? Or is it just kind of a drift that, yeah, you're vegan except when you're not? So you can be compassionate and clear. You can be powerful and intentional and still flexible about some things. But I think you have to decide. I think you have to decide, not because I'll judge you one way or another, but I think you have to decide because otherwise the culture decides. Otherwise your community will decide for you, or the people around you, the 5 people you spend most time with, they'll decide for you. And spoiler alert, the culture, the community, they rarely choose veganism. So moderation, yes, it can be a deeply compassionate strategy, but only if you own it and you define it. Don't let moderation be your middle ground because you're afraid to be specific or it seems hard to be clear. So my Veg Your Bestie, here's your Veg Your Best challenge this week is to choose one area. It doesn't have to be in your vegan world because you know what? Veganism, plant-based eating, it's not all the people who listen here are having any trouble with it. Some of us are trying to now figure out another way of living or improving or changing things in the world. So choose an area where you've been practicing a kind of default rearview mirror decision about moderation and decide to make a decision. Whatever it is, write it down, set a review date, that's it. Because I don't think you're here to be adrift on life's sea. I don't think you're here to just be vague or moderate. I think you're here to be intentional and powerful. So if September was a blur for you too, October had so many more options in October, I'm hoping. So what's your decision? What's essential for you? The Veg Your Best method is not to make your life harder. It's always been designed only to make you in charge of your own life. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to listen to anybody else's standards about any of these choices. But I do think that you will love being on purpose in your own life. So that when the hard days or weeks or months like September for me show up, they do for all of us, even then, you kind of know exactly what your priorities are going forward. So, as always, if this sparked anything for you, even a complaint, I'm open for a complaint. If it sparked anything for you today's episode on moderation, hit reply to the Vmail that comes every week, or DM me on Instagram, or you can share this episode with someone else who might be stuck in that moderation murk. And until next week, my Vedge Your Bestie, just veg your best. Vedge Your Best podcast production, music, and editing by Charlie Weinshank. Thanks, Charlie. Before you go, it would mean so much to me and the Vedge Your Best team if you would hit subscribe, leave us a 5-star review, or share with someone you think might be interested. Something about algorithms, it helps bump us up a little in the rankings, and that's the best way to help others find the podcast and for us to find our audience. So, until next week, make it easy and veg your best.